The first sign came as a whisper barely perceptible across the vastness of the galactic concord. It was an anomaly, a ripple in the subspace channels. Just a flicker, a minor interference that no one thought to investigate. But within hours, that whisper became a scream. It was the Chiron fleet, a prized battle group of the Concord, assigned to defend the outer rim, and it had vanished. Without a trace, not a single distress signal, no wreckage, no survivors, just a cold silence spreading through the dark void of space. Then came the second disappearance, and the third. One by one, entire systems along the rim fell into the same eerie quiet, their once thriving colonies consumed without a sound. Each report sent waves of shock through the Galactic Council, and soon, panic began to ripple through the heart of the Concord. The enemy, whoever they were, wasn't just attacking. They were erasing. A state of emergency was declared. The leadership of the Galactic Concord convened in the council hall, its sterile, metallic walls a cold reflection of the urgent tension within. Ambassador Renar, a member of the High Council, paced back and forth as the holographic maps of the galaxy flickered in front of him. The peaceful coalition was crumbling. Piece by piece, what could possibly cause so much destruction without leaving a single trace? Then, the data came in. The Entral. The transmission was brief, the source almost untraceable. It was a scout ship, or what had once been a scout ship. The message was a simple, harrowing phrase, one that sent a chill down the spine of every leader in the room. The Entral are here. They are us now. Prepare to be absorbed. Reiner froze, his hand gripping the edge of the council's holotable. The Entral, he murmured, as if confirming the unthinkable. He had thought them a myth, an ancient species driven to extinction during the early days of Concord exploration. The Entral were infamous for their hunger, not just for resources, but for life itself. Their ships were living entities, part biomechanical and part organic. Their soldiers were monstrous amalgams of machine and flesh, designed for one purpose: conquest. But these creatures, these horrors, had returned, and they were unlike anything the Concord had anticipated. The first attacks hadn't been random. They were deliberate, methodical. Systems were targeted with precision, each one systematically consumed by the advancing Meshral forces. And what was worse, the Concord's weapons, their most advanced tech, did nothing. Nothing at all. The defenses are useless, Commander Orla Kerr stated grimly, her voice cutting through the growing panic. We've already lost too much. Their technology, it's absorbing ours, adapting faster than we can react. Reinar's face paled as the weight of the situation settled in. The Entral were too powerful, too fast, and they were spreading. We have no choice, he said, turning to the council members. Activate Emergency Protocol 7. We need help. Now. The room went silent. The words hung in the air like a dark omen. Humanity, Reinar muttered under his breath. No one had spoken the name of Earth in decades. Humanity had been quarantined after their brutal wars and their volatile history. The Galactic Concord had decided, long ago, that they weren't ready. But now the galaxy was on the brink of collapse. A single order was transmitted from the council chamber. Initiate Protocol 7. Request humanity's assistance. And so, across the vast expanse of space, the call was sent. A call for the deadliest warriors in the galaxy, one humanity had long ago decided to forget. Would they answer? The galaxy held its breath. As the Concord scrambled to maintain control of the outer rim, a silent message was transmitted across the vast distances of space. The request was simple, yet it carried the weight of everything the Galactic Concord had built. Assistance required. Protocol 7 initiated. Immediate response needed. Ambassador Renar stood before the council, his face a mask of resolve, though his mind churned with doubt. He had been part of the negotiations when humanity was first quarantined, when Earth's violent history and unpredictable temperament had been deemed too dangerous for the peace the Concorde had fought so long to maintain. He had believed it was for the best for all involved. But now, standing at the precipice of extinction, he wasn't so sure. Was it a mistake to cut humanity off? A murmur spread through the council hall as the first responses began to arrive. The protocol was simple: send an emissary to Earth, plead for help, and pray that humanity hadn't forgotten how to fight. However, no one had prepared for how quickly Earth would respond. The diplomatic AI envoy dispatched to Sol system arrived in under 2 days, an impossibility by any conventional means of travel, yet Earth's technological prowess had always been a well-guarded secret. The Concorde leaders were uneasy, their minds filled with both dread and hope as the envoy docked at the massive orbital station hovering above Earth's atmosphere. Dr. Sora Eldrin, Concorde's lead liaison to the mission, sat at the data terminal, her eyes glued to the communications feed. She had studied Earth's history in great detail, but nothing had prepared her for the cold professionalism of the message she was about to read. It was signed by the Commission, an enigmatic council that ruled Earth's military and scientific operations in secret. No formal greeting, no pleasantries, just a single, chilling line. Request received. Deployment en route. Nothing more. No questions, no qualifiers. Just efficiency. Sora's mind raced. Deployment en route. In less than 3 hours, Earth had activated its military response. How? Humanity had been isolated for over a century. No one knew what kind of power or resources they had accumulated in that time. For a moment, a shiver ran down her spine. Could it be that they had already been preparing for something like this? She turned to Renar, her brow furrowed in concern. They didn't hesitate. They didn't question the request. How could they have mobilized so fast? Reinar's jaw tightened. I don't know, but we've opened the door now, and I fear what might come through. On Earth's end, the Commission had been waiting for this moment. It had been decades since they had last faced the harsh truth of humanity's violent history, the dark wars that had scared their species, wars that had shaped them into something different. But they had learned. The Commission's secret archives, the Project Vanguard files, told a story of preparation, of battle-hardened soldiers, scientists, and engineers working in secret to craft an arsenal not just for defense, but for annihilation. The galaxy thought humanity was weak. Now, they would see otherwise. As Earth's warships powered up and prepared to break through the fabric of space itself, a final message was transmitted to the Concorde. Humanity is not what you remember. We are not what we were. We are something more now. The Concorde leaders had no idea what was about to unfold. The galaxy's greatest unknown, humanity, was coming, but they had no way of understanding just how deadly their return would be. The first human ships appeared on the fringe of the Concorde space, their dark hulls silhouetted against the backdrop of distant stars. The fleet's sheer size was enough to make the Concorde shiver, but it wasn't just the scale that terrified them. It was the unknown, the chilling realization that the humans weren't coming to negotiate peace. They were coming for war. The first human warships emerged from the deep void like shadows given form. No heralding flares of light, no declaration of arrival, just the sudden, eerie appearance of immense, black-hulled ships slipping into Concorde space. These vessels were unlike anything the Galactic Concorde had ever seen. They seemed to absorb the light around them, rendering them ghostly and indistinct. Their silhouette was minimal, devoid of ornamentation, but unmistakably built for war. The Concorde's primary defense fleets, stationed at Corella and IV, scrambled into high alert status as the human ships entered the system, their precise movements causing unease. These were not the clumsy craft of an inexperienced species. Every maneuver was calculated, deliberate. It was clear that these humans, once considered primitive, had learned the harsh lessons of survival. And then some. Concorde sensors detected no immediate weapons activity, but the ship's sheer size and the presence of heavily armed escort fleets sent a chill down the spines of military commanders. And then, without warning, a voice, calm, dispassionate, and undeniably human, rang through the communication channels. "This is the Sovereign Vanguard. Prepare for deployment. We do not seek permission. We only seek action." The message was as chilling as it was brief. No questions, no pleasantries, just a command to get to work. On the surface of Corellon IV, where the last Entral hive had been obliterated just hours before, the human soldiers began to disembark. They didn't announce themselves, didn't make any overtures to the surviving Concorde personnel. Instead, they moved with a quiet efficiency, like a wave of implacable death descending upon a battlefield. The Sovereign Vanguard were soldiers of a different breed. They wore matte black, seamless armor, their helmets featureless save for a single crimson slit where their eyes would have been. The armor, it seemed, was more than just a physical shield. It was a part of them. It melded with their bodies as if designed for that very purpose, to become a second skin. Each soldier was a weapon, honed for maximum lethality, and the world was their weapon platform. Concorde military commanders, who had studied every known species fighting tactics in the galaxy, were baffled. There was no sign of human weakness, no hesitation, no reliance on conventional tactics. Instead, the Vanguard worked as one, a perfectly coordinated unit with a single purpose: to eliminate the Entral with absolute precision. On the surface, the Entral soldiers were still regrouping, patching together the remains of their decimated forces. But they had never seen anything like the Sovereign Vanguard. They adapted quickly, as they always did, but they were met with a cruelty they had not anticipated. As the Vanguard moved through the Entral positions, the battlefield was marked with a savage efficiency. Bodies, Entral bodies, were dragged out of the way, tossed aside like trash as the humans pressed on. They never stopped. They never faltered. In less than 17 hours, the Entral presence on Corellon IV was eradicated. The field of battle was still. The dead lay everywhere, but there was no victory cry, no sign of triumph. The humans didn't celebrate. They simply finished their work. The only sound was the hum of their advanced machinery as they gathered what they needed and left the ruined planet behind. There was no victory speech, no expressions of camaraderie. The message was clear. They were just doing their job. Back at the command station, Dr. Sora Eldrin watched with a growing sense of awe and fear. The Entral, once thought invincible, had been crushed by a species the Concorde had all but forgotten. The question now lingered in the air. What exactly had humanity become? The answer was unsettling. In the wake of their grim work, the Sovereign Vanguard left a single message encoded into the planet's communication systems. It was short, to the point, and it echoed throughout the Concorde fleet. Problem solved. The battle for Corellon IV had left a profound impact on the Concorde leadership. What had started as an anxious hope that humanity could be the galaxy's salvation quickly turned into a bone-chilling reality. Humanity had not only survived the horrors of their past, they had mastered it. The Sovereign Vanguard were not mere soldiers. They were a terrifyingly efficient force, built for one purpose, and one purpose only: annihilation. The Entral had been a test, and humanity had passed with chilling perfection. Back at the Concorde Command Center, Dr. Sora Eldrin and a handful of senior analysts worked tirelessly, poring over every scrap of data that had been collected from the battle. It was clear that the Vanguard's tactics were something entirely foreign to the Concorde's own military doctrine. The speed, the precision, the utter lack of hesitation, it was nothing short of disturbing. "What are they?" one of the analysts muttered, scrolling through sensor readings. "Their technology is beyond anything we've seen, and they're soldiers. They're like machines, but they're human. How?" Dr. Eldrin didn't answer immediately. She had been studying humanity for years, trying to understand their history, their military engagements, their culture. But every answer only seemed to raise more questions. From what she had learned, the Vanguard were the product of humanity's Project Vanguard, a Black Ops initiative so secretive that even most Earth leaders had been unaware of its existence. But the details of the project were sparse, buried deep beneath layers of government secrecy. Then there was the matter of their tactics. The Entril, for all their deadly reputation, were masters of biological warfare, capable of adapting to virtually any threat. But the Vanguard didn't fight like anyone else. They didn't adapt. They didn't need to. They simply overwhelmed. The Vanguard's method was simple. Strike with such force and efficiency that the enemy was completely eradicated before they could even react. There were no complex strategies or emotional decisions, just cold, relentless action. The Entril had been taken by surprise, yes, but it was more than that. The Vanguard had known what they would do before they did it. Dr. Eldrin looked up at the holographic displays, now showing a map of the galaxy. Corellan IV had been one victory, but what about the rest of the galaxy? What about the Entril's true fleet, hidden somewhere in the galactic core, waiting to strike? Could humanity keep up this pace? Could they win? And yet there was a lingering sense of unease in her gut. It wasn't just their tactics that were unnerving. It was their lack of humanity. The Sovereign Vanguard had no need for diplomacy, no interest in conversation. They were not allies. They were executioners. What if the Entril weren't the real enemy? What if humanity was? Meanwhile, in the command room aboard the flagship Vanguard 1, Commander Orlikar reviewed the mission reports from Corellan IV with her staff. As the Concorde's lead military officer, she had been tasked with coordinating humanity's involvement in the battle, and what she had seen on the ground was beyond anything she could have imagined. The Vanguard soldiers moved like one, their precision and discipline defying logic. The Entril, who could regenerate and adapt with terrifying speed, had stood no chance against the relentless assault of the humans. But what truly disturbed Kara was something she'd observed during the final sweep of the planet. The Vanguard didn't just fight to kill the Entril. They hunted them. She had watched, horrified, as squads of Vanguard soldiers systematically sought out every last trace of Entril infestation, leaving nothing behind. There was no mercy, no prisoners, no survivors. The humans didn't just neutralize the threat. They eradicated it with a savagery that had shaken even her. It was becoming clear that humanity had not only mastered war, they had made it an art form. And yet there was no time to reflect on the terror of their methods. The real war was only just beginning. The Entril's main fleet had been located, and the Sovereign Vanguard was already preparing to make its move. Commander Kerr turned to Dr. Eldrin, who had been observing the reports with increasing concern. "Do you think the Vanguard can handle what's coming next?" Carr asked, her voice steady but filled with unease. Dr. Eldrin met her gaze, her face pale. "I'm starting to think that the question isn't whether they can handle it, but whether they'll leave anything left for us to salvage afterward." Back on Earth, the Commission was already making their next move. The message was simple, cold, and final. "We're ready for the core. Deploying the Leviathan-class warship. Expect nothing short of total annihilation." It was becoming increasingly clear to everyone involved. Humanity was not here to fight for the galaxy. Humanity was here to win. The news spread like wildfire through the Galactic Concorde. The Leviathan was being deployed. The Leviathan-class warship was a relic of humanity's most secretive war programs, a monstrosity so large that it was barely conceivable. The ship was not just a weapon. It was a floating city, an entire war machine designed to unleash devastation on an unimaginable scale. Built in the shadows of Earth's most classified defense facilities, it was humanity's final answer to any threat, a tool forged from their darkest history. And now, it was preparing to enter the fray. Commander Orlikar watched the latest transmission from Earth's Commission with a mixture of disbelief and dread. The data was incomplete, but the message was clear. The Leviathan had already begun its journey. The ship had been dormant for over 2 decades, but now, its engines were powered up, and it was barreling toward the galactic core. The scope of this new development was almost too much for Care to grasp. The Leviathan was more than just a ship. It was a legend among military circles, whispered about in classified circles as the ultimate weapon. Its mere existence had been a well-kept secret, and now humanity had brought it out of hiding. "We need to prepare," Care said, her voice cold. "This is something we weren't ready for." Dr. Eldrin, standing next to her, didn't answer immediately. She was still processing what this meant. The Vanguard's precision and speed had been terrifying. But this, the Leviathan, was an entirely different level of power. An extinction-level weapon that could wipe out entire fleets with minimal effort. The Entral, with all their adaptive technology, wouldn't stand a chance against such overwhelming force. But there was more to it than that. Humanity was no longer simply the answer to the natural threat. They were becoming the galaxy's new force of will. The Concord had hoped they would be able to contain the damage, to make use of humanity's brutal efficiency in eliminating the natural. But now, it was clear that humanity wasn't interested in containment. They wanted to dominate. "They're coming," Dr. Eldrin murmured, her eyes wide as she turned away from the screen, her voice tinged with something approaching fear. "They're not just here to fight the natural. They're here to reshape everything." Care's jaw tightened. "We knew they were strong, but this is something else. What are we dealing with?" Before Eldrin could answer, the room went dark, and a low, throbbing hum filled the air. It was the sound of power, a warning signal that the Leviathan's engines were fully activated. A ship was nearing the galactic core, and with it, a sense of inevitability followed in its wake. There would be no negotiation, no truce. The Leviathan would not stop until it had eradicated its enemies, and the Entral, for all their adaptability, would be first in line. The rest of the Concord fleet began to move into position. They had no choice but to follow humanity's lead. The battle for the core was about to begin, and it would not be fought with diplomacy or peace talks. This would be a fight to the death, with humanity holding the bloodied sword. As the Leviathan approached the core, the Entral were already preparing for the worst. Their ships were gathering in a desperate attempt to hold their ground, but they knew it was futile. Their technology, their superior biological weapons, meant nothing in the face of such overwhelming power. Inside the Leviathan, Captain Cade Valens stood in front of a massive war room table. He was the captain of the Leviathan, the one human entrusted with commanding the ultimate weapon of destruction. His reputation was one of unflinching resolve, a cold tactician who knew the cost of victory. "We will not stop," Captain Valens declared, his voice echoing in the war room. "Not until they are wiped from the stars. This is what we've trained for." Around him, the crew of the Leviathan stood silently. There was no cheering, no celebration, just quiet determination. The enemy was coming, and the only response humanity knew was to strike first, strike hard, and never look back. As the massive ship crossed into the territory of the Entral, the vastness of the mission ahead seemed to settle over the crew like a dark cloud. But to Captain Valens, this was not a moment of uncertainty. This was what humanity had been waiting for. This was their moment to assert themselves, to make sure the galaxy understood that humanity was no longer a footnote in the annals of history. They were its new authors. The Leviathan's massive cannons began to charge, its weapon systems coming online with a low, menacing hum. The first volley would be the beginning of the end for the Entral, but it would also mark the beginning of a new, terrifying era for the galaxy. The Concord, the Entral, and all the other factions would soon learn. Humanity was no longer an ally. Humanity was now a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Leviathan's engines had ignited the moment it crossed the boundary into the Entral's home sector. A colossal, living weapon of destruction, it moved forward like a dark monolith, its massive hull absorbing the light of the distant stars. The ship's wake was a trail of utter destruction as it passed, obliterating everything in its path with ruthless efficiency. For the Entral, There was no escape. There was no hope. Inside the command center, Captain Cade Valens stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the holoscreen showing the natural fleet ahead. He could feel the weight of the moment settling in. This was what humanity had prepared for. A war not just for survival, but for total supremacy. The fleet was in position. The command to strike was only moments away. "We'll strike first," Valens said coldly, his voice as hard as the ship's metallic hull. "Their ships are built for survival. We're built for extermination." Around him, the crew remained silent. There was no fear, no hesitation. Just the grim understanding that the Entril represented something more than a mere enemy. They were an existential threat to humanity's rise, a threat that would not be tolerated. As Valens gave the final order, a series of explosions rang out from the Leviathan's weapon systems, and the first volley ripped through space. The blast was like the breaking of a star, sudden and blinding. The Entril fleet, unprepared for such raw, concentrated force, was torn apart in seconds. Their adaptive shielding, designed to evolve in response to enemy fire, was no match for the Leviathan's power. The first wave was completely obliterated before they could even fire a shot in return. The sheer scale of the destruction sent shockwaves through the fleet, and the remaining neutral ships scattered like rats fleeing a predator. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Another wave incoming, Lieutenant Kolka reported, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding on the screens. "They're reorganizing. We've only disabled a third of their fleet." Valens didn't flinch. "They'll adapt. They always do. We don't give them the time." The second volley was already on its way. This time, however, the Entril had begun to adjust. Their ships weren't just fleeing. They were learning. Their adaptive systems began to engage, their shields shifting, their weapons reconfiguring. Yet even as the Entril fought back, the Leviathan advanced, unstoppable. "Direct hit on their central command vessel," Kolka called out. The Leviathan's main guns fired again. And this time, a massive explosion engulfed the Entril flagship, its twisted wreckage drifting into the vacuum of space. Still, the Entril retaliated, launching their organic ships, which were hybrids of biology and technology, straight at the Leviathan. The vanguard soldiers, stationed across the Leviathan's hull, prepared for what was coming. Even as the Leviathan's weapons tore apart the Entril vessels, they knew there would be no clean victory. The Entril weren't just attackers. They were survivors. And survivors, as humanity knew all too well, could never be underestimated. As the battle raged on, Dr. Eldrin stood on the bridge, observing the carnage from behind a transparent shield. Her hands trembled, but her expression remained cold. She had expected violence, but not this level of brutality. She had read all the reports, studied Earth's transformation into a militarized empire. But this was something more. "I thought the Entril were the greatest threat we'd face," she murmured. "But they're not just fighting a war. They're carving out an empire. A new order." Valens turned his gaze toward her, his eyes unfeeling. "We are the new order, Doctor. The galaxy will either adapt or it will die." The Leviathan continued its assault. Explosions rang out with every second, the blackness of space lit up by the flashing of weapons and the wreckage of shattered neutral ships. There was no reprieve for the enemy. Their greatest forces were being obliterated, and the Leviathan, and humanity, would not stop until they were gone. By the end of the day, there would be no Entril to counter humanity's rise. By the end of the day, the galaxy would belong to the sovereign vanguard. Back in the Concorde, panic was setting in. The reports of the Leviathan's progress spread throughout the fleet with terrifying speed. Entire systems fell under the shadow of the ship, and it wasn't just the Entril who felt the weight of its presence. The Concorde's own forces were beginning to question the true nature of their alliance with humanity. Was this a partnership, or had they unknowingly unleashed a force they could no longer control? Dr. Eldrin's message to the Concorde Council was a cold, honest warning. Humanity has crossed a line. They've gone from allies to conquerors, and I'm not sure there's any going back. The first wave of Nishral had fallen, but the true battle for the galaxy was just beginning. The battle for the galactic core raged on, but the initial resistance was crumbling. With each passing hour, more of their ships were reduced to rubble, drifting lifeless in the cold expanse of space. The Leviathan, humanity's indomitable weapon, continued its relentless march through the core, leaving nothing but scorched remnants of Nishral forces in its wake. Captain Cade Valens stood in the war room, his gaze focused on the holographic map of the battlefield. The Nishral had one last stronghold, the planet Jelkur, a heavily fortified world located at the very heart of their empire. It was their last bastion, the final line of defense. "They've retreated to Jelkur," Lieutenant Kolka reported, her voice grim as she watched the tactical data scroll across her screen. "Their fleet is gathering in orbit. It's their last stand." Valens nodded. "It will not be enough." The Leviathan's cannons were already powered up. The ship had obliterated nearly all Nishral forces in the core, but Jelkur was different. It was a fortress, a world capable of withstanding conventional attacks for far longer than anything humanity had yet faced. The Nishral would make their final stand here, but it would be their last. Humanity had already sealed their fate. "We'll take the planet and their fleet in one swift motion," Valens said, his voice cold and commanding. "Prepare the Sovereign Vanguard for planetary assault. We end this today." On the surface of Jelkur, the last remnants of the Nishral were digging in, fortifying every inch of their planet's surface. The Nishral had once been the apex predators of the galaxy, feared for their ability to adapt and evolve at an astonishing rate. But now, their strength was fading. The Sovereign Vanguard had crippled their fleets, their leadership, and their very will to fight. Even now, their soldiers scrambled, attempting to regroup in the face of the inevitable. But they were too late. The first wave of the Vanguard soldiers descended upon Jelkur's surface, their black armor glinting like the night itself. They didn't speak, didn't pause. The Nishral attempted to launch their final defensive maneuvers, but it was futile. The Vanguard were too fast, too precise. They swept through the Nishral positions like a tide of death, overwhelming any resistance that dared to rise against them. In the shadows of the battlefield, Dr. Sora Eldrin watched in silence. She stood behind the glass of the command center, her face pale, her thoughts racing. She had seen the carnage from the Leviathan's bombardment, watched as entire Nishral cities were obliterated, as their armies were dismantled with surgical precision. But this was something different. The Vanguard weren't just soldiers. They were agents of annihilation. There was no mercy in their actions, no hesitation in their movements. They were a force that consumed everything in its path, leaving nothing behind. Eldrin's hand trembled as she adjusted the settings on her datapad, scanning the battlefield reports. The Vanguard weren't just taking the planet. They were erasing it. Every inch of Jelkur was being scoured, every Nishral stronghold systematically destroyed. And as she watched the battle unfold, she couldn't help but ask herself the same question she had been avoiding for weeks. What happens when humanity's enemies are gone? She had been right. The Nishral weren't the true target. Humanity wasn't here to save the galaxy. They were here to reshape it, to dominate it. As the last Nishral stronghold fell, and the screams of the dying echoed across the battlefield, Dr. Eldrin found herself facing an uncomfortable truth. Humanity had become more than just a force of nature. They had become the new nature of the galaxy. The question now wasn't whether the galaxy would accept them, it was whether it could survive them. In the Leviathan's command room, Valens stood silently, watching the tactical feed. Jelkur's defenses had fallen. The Nishral were done. "Captain," Lieutenant Kolka's voice broke the silence. "We've completed the assault. Jelkur has been neutralized." Valens didn't smile, didn't cheer. He simply nodded. "Good. Prepare the message for the rest of the galaxy. Let them know what we've done here today." On the bridge, the crew turned to their consoles, preparing to send the final transmission. It was a simple message, devoid of any fanfare or celebration. It was a declaration of humanity's place in the universe. The antral threat has been eliminated. This galaxy is now under the protection of humanity. Any resistance will be met with complete annihilation. The transmission sent, the message clear. The galaxy had been irrevocably changed. Humanity had proven itself more than capable of surviving. They had proven they were now its masters. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the Concord, the truth began to set in. The age of human dominion had begun. The last embers of the antral empire drifted into the void, nothing more than smoldering ruins in the wake of humanity's unstoppable onslaught. Jelker's once vibrant cities now lay in ruins, their skyscrapers shattered, their streets littered with the ashes of their former inhabitants. The sovereign vanguard had completed their mission with chilling precision, eradicating every trace of the antral from the galaxy. The galaxy had witnessed a new power rise from the ashes of the old. And now, with the last of their enemies fallen, humanity stood at the precipice of something far greater than simple survival. They were not just victors. They were the architects of the galaxy's future. Commander Orlaker stood on the observation deck of the Leviathan, gazing out into the endless expanse of space. The stars had never seemed so distant, so cold. Yet there was something undeniably powerful in the silence, a power that radiated from the heart of humanity's triumph. The Leviathan, now a symbol of dominance, continued its slow, steady orbit around the shattered remains of Jelkor, its weapons dormant for the moment. "Victory is ours," she said, her voice tight. She hadn't felt this way after their earlier successes. Kerr had long since learned to suppress emotion, to focus on the mission. But today there was a strange heaviness in the air, a weight that hung over her like a cloud. "Yes, it is," Dr. Eldrin replied from the doorway, her voice hollow. She had been silent ever since the final strike on Jelkor, her face drained of color. Her role in all of this had always been clear: to study, to report. But now that the mission was complete, now that humanity had become the undisputed force in the galaxy, she wasn't so sure of her place. The galaxy had changed in a way they hadn't anticipated. Kerr turned to her, noticing the concern in the doctor's eyes. "What's wrong?" Eldrin paused, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "Do you ever wonder what happens next? Now that the antral are gone, now that we've destroyed their empire, what are we?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time, Kerr wasn't sure how to answer. The war had been long, brutal, and necessary. But Eldrin was right. It was over. The antral were no longer a threat, and the rest of the galaxy would now look to humanity for leadership. But could they be leaders, or were they simply conquerors? "We're survivors," Kerr said finally. "And now, we rebuild." But Eldrin's eyes narrowed, not in skepticism, but in something deeper. Survivors. Yes, but survivors of a war, not the galaxy. Kerr's heart skipped a beat as the realization began to settle in. They weren't rebuilding a galaxy. They were remaking it. Humanity had not only survived the war, they had reshaped the future to their will. And the rest of the galaxy would either submit or be destroyed. There was no place for negotiation, no place for mercy. A cold wave of understanding washed over the crew. The sovereign vanguard, as powerful as it was, had no equal now. Humanity was the apex, and the galaxy had only one option left: to bend to their will or face annihilation. The message had been broadcasted across every communication channel in the galaxy. It was short, but it echoed across every corner of space, reverberating in the hearts of every race, every faction, every empire. The age of humanity has begun. The galaxy belongs to us. Join us, or perish. The words were final. The decision was made. Back in the heart of the Concord, leaders and military officials convened in a hidden council chamber. They had seen the writing on the wall. Humanity, in its relentless quest for survival, had become something more. And now they had to decide whether they would resist, fight, or fall in line. But no matter what they chose, they knew one thing for certain. This was no longer the era of the natural. It was the dawn of humanity's dominion. As the Leviathan's engines powered up once more, preparing to set course for new frontiers, Dr. Eldrin couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The galaxy was vast, and humanity's power was growing. But at what cost? What had they become in the pursuit of this dominance? Could they be the galaxy's saviors, or had they simply replaced one tyrant with another? The stars blinked above her, indifferent, and humanity's future stretched out before her, dark and infinite.